Hi everyone, and welcome to today's session in the Working Smarter series. The topic of today is Design ODM Basics and Design Version Compare in Viedoc. The session is being recorded, and you will be provided with a link to the recording within the next couple of weeks, in case you want to view it again later, or if you have a colleague that could not join today. There is a Q&A function, so if you have any questions regarding the content of my presentation, please feel free to raise them in the Q&A function. We'll try to answer all those questions towards the end of the presentation. If we don't have time for that, we will get back to you later with answers within the next couple of weeks. Also, if you have any technical issues, feel free to raise that in the chat, and the team here will do their best to try to help you. Okay, so let's get started. My name is Johannes Molin, and I'm a product manager at Viedoc Technologies. I've been with the company for 17 years now, so a very long time. But despite the ODM standard being so central at our company, I never really dipped my toes in this standard until just a couple of years ago. The ODM standard always seemed a bit difficult to me and difficult to grasp and get an overview of, so I never really tried to understand it. And I also had plenty of people around me all the time that knew this very well, so I never had to spend time with it. But now, fast forward a couple of years, when I understand it better, I wish that I had been given like a very basic introduction, like the one that I'm planning to give to you today. So if you're a beginner with designer or design ODMs, I hope this presentation will be useful to you. The agenda for today is just very quickly cover what is CDISC and the ODM and SDM standard. I will then elaborate a little bit between the differences about clinical data ODM structure and the design ODM structure, and then of course focus more on the design ODM structure, since that's the topic of the day. Finally, towards the last third of the presentation, I will show you our design version compare tool in Viedoc that is being released with Viedoc 484. And you will see when I get to that part why we have put those two topics with design version compare and ODM in the same webinar, because it all fits together. And like I said, towards the end, as time allows, we will answer questions that have been raised in the Q&A. Okay, very quickly about CDISC, and here I have, without shame, just copied some text from the webpage, but I will not speak a lot about this, just to mention that CDISC is an organization developing standards for our industry. The purpose with this, or the vision with this, is to make our research more effective, to make data more accessible, interoperable, and reusable. CDISC is developing a number of standards, and you are probably well aware of many of these standards. Here you can see a few of them on the screen. You have probably heard a lot about STTM, ADAM, C-, but what we will focus on today is the ODM standard that you can see in the bottom left, and the SDM extension. So let's take a quick look at how that's defined. What's ODM? Well, it stands for Operation Data Model. It's intended as a vendor-neutral and platform-independent format. So it shouldn't matter who is the vendor, it shouldn't matter what platform you're using, but the idea is that here we should have a format that can speak across companies and across different platforms. So it's a format for a data structure to facilitate a regulatory compliant acquisition, archival, and exchange of metadata and data. And as you are probably aware, it's the standard in our industry, the golden standard. And just as an example, you might not have exported data in ODM format, but if you have been involved in studies with integrations, it's very likely that the integrations used data in ODM format. And just to provide a Viedoc context to this, in Viedoc, Viedoc, first of all, is built on the ODM standard. So clinical data can be exported in ODM format from Viedoc, and you can also export the CRF designs in ODM format. And it's important to know and understand that every action that you as a designer, you're doing in Viedoc Designer is writing to the ODM file in the database. So basically, you could, a bit simplified, say that Viedoc Designer is a tool to view design ODMs and write to these design ODMs. But keep that in mind, every action done in Viedoc Designer is actually modifying the ODM file. So next we have SDM. That's an extension to the ODM structure. It's an extension to provide additional level of details for structure, workflow, and timing. It is not mandatory. So if you see this or if you use other systems, they might not use SDM. But in Viedoc, you will see some examples from the SDM extension. And one very clear example is the use of activities that we use in Viedoc. And if you export the ODM design file, you will see in Viedoc that they will have the suffix SDM, the study, trial, design model. So I will take an example of how the SDM actually works. So I have here a screenshot from Viedoc Designer. If you're a designer, this is a very familiar view to you. We have a view from the study workflow, and we see two scheduled events on the page. So you can see that the white boxes here, they are events. You can see I've highlighted the screening event, but within each event, you will also have activities. And these are the green boxes that you can see. And of course, within these activities, you can have multiple forms, and in the forms you have items and so on. But the use of activities is sort of specific to the SDM extension. So just to take an example here, what would happen without these SDM extensions? So when you export a design file from Viedoc, you can actually choose to exclude SDM extensions. If you are planning to export a design from Viedoc and then import it to Viedoc again, like for another study or moving a study from the training instance to the production instance, it would make no sense at all to exclude SDM extensions. But I'm doing this now just for the purpose of this demonstration. So I have exported a design without the SDM extensions, and I have then imported the design again. And then you can see that the study workflow will immediately look quite different. We still have the events, we still have the forms, we still have the items within the forms because that's part of the ODM standard, but we do not have separate activities since that was part of the SDM extension. I will now also talk a little bit about vendor extensions. And again, this is some text directly from CDISC webpage. The vendor extensions are used when you have different attributes or different information in your specific system that cannot really be expressed in the ODM model. And to encourage these systems to still adhere to the ODM standard, they allow for these vendor extensions. So A bit simplified, the vendor extensions will give vendors flexibility to add vendor-specific attributes so that the rest of the file can adhere to the ODM standard. And if we take some examples from the Viedoc context here, you will see that if you export a design ODM from Viedoc, you will have the suffix v4 in some places. And examples of this could be layout attributes, where we have different options of the width of items or item groups and so on. Another example is the patient card item. So if you have used our EDC, you know that, well, when you log in and launch the EDC, each patient has a patient card with some basic information printed on that patient card. That's something you configure in Viedoc Designer, but that configuration of the patient card is not part of the ODM standard in any way. Therefore, we have that within our v4 extensions or vendor extensions. So let's take a similar example here with the vendor extensions like we did with the STM extensions. On the screen now, you can see a very typical form in Viedoc Designer. You can see that the width of the input fields for the different items are a bit different. We can have a radio button with a vertical layout. We have towards the bottom of the form here, we have some half-page item groups. Typical layout styling, you could say, that we use in Viedoc. So if I again do this exercise of exporting this design without the Viedoc extensions, and again, I want to highlight that you would never do this if you plan to import the design to Viedoc again. But for the sake of the example, I export the design without Viedoc extensions, and I import it back to the system again. First of all, when importing, I get multiple options on how I want different things to look. The result when importing could be something like what you see to the left. And there you can see each item has the same width of the input field, and each item is just followed by the next item without any spacing or anything to make the form easier to use or read. The option to the right is the other version where you have the items just stacked on top of each other, so a bit dull design perhaps. You can see the input fields again, they are all identical. For every item, it's the same. So regardless of the width you really need for that specific input field, it will be the same. You can also see that the radio button layout here is all horizontal. So we're losing some layout also on that part. Item groups are all full page and so on. But again, keep in mind, this was just as an example to see what the v4 attributes really bring to your design. Next, I will talk a little bit about the difference of the clinical data ODM and then move into the actual design ODM. And I think this is something that made me a bit confused a couple of years ago, and I couldn't really grasp this. But first of all, if you look at an exported ODM file with data, you would see a structure that you would probably intuitively expect. You would have clinical data stored per patient, and sure, you would have a site reference, but then you would have, for each patient, you would have study event data, such as a baseline event. Within the event, you would have form data, such as a vital signs form. Within that form, you would have item group data, such as VSG1 for the vital signs form. And then within the item groups, you would have item data. And again, as an example, systolic blood pressure in this case. If I zoom out one step, to see the entire structure of the ODM data export, you will see that there are additional sections included. And that's actually parts from the design. You will have the global variables, basic definitions, and metadata version taken directly from the design. Then you will have some admin data and then the clinical data that I just explained. And worth to highlight here is that the metadata version and clinical data version will be grouped per design version. So let's say that in your study, you have collected data in design version 1.0 and 2.0. You would have two groups of clinical data, one for each design version, and then you will have the data that was collected within that specific design version. And if data has been collected within a design version, you will also have the metadata version, meaning the design, the specific design that was used. So in the example I gave, you will then also have design version 1 and design version 2 in the metadata version. I mentioned the structure was a bit different in the design ODM. So if I also display that on the page, you will see that it is quite different. And I will walk you through all of these sections. But quickly to summarize, you have global variables, you have basic definitions, and then you have a metadata version. What's different here is that you will have, let's say, the study event definitions, where you have all the study events defined, but none of the forms. And then in the next section, you define all the forms. And the section after that, you define all the item groups and so on. So it's completely different to the structure with the clinical data. Okay, so let's speak more about the design ODM structure then. I will talk very little about global variables and basic definitions, pretty much because it's such a small part of the ODM. But I'll give you an example of what could be included here. So in the global variables, you will have some study descriptions, you will have some patient card information and so on. Things that are intended to span across different metadata versions. So if I provide or display a screenshot here from an ODM, you can see that we have study description, study name, we have patient card items with this vendor extension that I mentioned earlier. If I move on with basic definitions, it's short and sweet. It's measurement units. Again, they can span across multiple design versions. You will have an OID for that measurement unit, and you will have the actual label. And this would correspond to what you use in Designer for the sort of pre-built unit features. So if you're using the one where you can see on the bottom of the page here within Designer, then it's written in the ODM to the basic definitions part to the measurement units. And then number 3, we have the metadata version. But here I'm actually going to move away from the PowerPoint presentation for a while. And I'm going to try to display this in another tool to look at the real design. So let's see if this will work. Yes, so here we go. Now I've opened a design, an ODM format, a design that was exported from Viedoc. I've opened this in Notepad++. That's the software I typically use to view ODM files. But since it's XML, I mean, you can even use a standard web browser. I'm just used to using Notepad++. The first thing I will do to try to get a better overview of this is to just collapse everything to gradually open the parts that I want to look at. So here you can see again, for this study, we have global variables, we have basic definitions, and we have the metadata version. And if you see the number of rows we have in this file, you can see right away that the metadata version is the majority of this file. It's design version 1 in the study I exported. So I will expand the metadata version. Here you can see a number of different sections. And like I mentioned before, we will have definitions and we will have references. So I will just start quickly by opening the protocol section where you will have study event references. So we refer to the study events, we have the IDs of these study events. We also have SDM extensions here with structure and workflow and timing. And if I just expand the structure tab, you will see that we have the activities defined. So they are all defined within the protocol part of the ODM. The next section is study event definitions or study event def. So we have all the events that are included in my design. They are defined here. I will open the screening event as an example. The first thing we should know here is that here we will define everything related to this specific event. However, we will not detail all information about all forms or about all items within this event. Instead, we will include something called a form ref or a reference to the form. So we're basically pretty much just saying that within the screening event, we have these forms. But we're not detailing the forms further. That will come in the form def section or the form definition section. And again, here you can also see the use of activities where we refer to the activities. Remember, they were defined in the protocol section. So here we just have a reference to these activities by using the OID. So if I continue after the study event definition, I will have the form definition. So I will use this one as an example. And if I scroll all the way to the right, you will see that this is my vital signs form. It has the name vital signs and the OID VS. You will see that there are a number of attributes for this form within the form definition. Some of them will have the V4 extension tag, meaning that this is not perhaps something that is conveniently expressed in the ODM standard. So instead, we're using the vendor extension for this. Also within the form def, we are listing the item group refs, or the references to the item groups that are present in this form. But again, we're not speaking about what items are included in this form. That will come in the item group def section. So here you will see some information about the item group ref. You will see what item groups are included in this form, and you will have some layout attributes for this specific item group. Okay, so I will continue to move on to the item group def part. And of course, depending on what type of form it is and what type of item group and what kind of settings you use, different attributes may be printed here in the ODM in the item group def section. But a bit simplified, what you can see in the item group definition, some basic information about the item group and then references to each item that occurs or is present within this item group. So as an example, you can see that we have systolic blood pressure here. You have an item ref referring to this ID, and you have some layout attributes for this specific item. However, if you want to know more information about this item, the same drill again, you will need to move to the item def or item definition. So I'll do that, and you can see again that's a much longer section. There are more items than item groups and forms, of course. So I've highlighted 2 different items that are worth to look at here. So first of all, we have the systolic blood pressure that I just mentioned. So we can again find that with the OID. Here we have more information about the specific item. First of all, we can see the question. The question will always be covered in a translated text with the language like this. English is the default language, but it could be another language. If you're using Viedoc Me for your forms, there could be multiple translated texts here. So you could have labels in multiple languages. So labels are contained within this translated text. Then we also have a measurement unit reference. So again, referring back to the basic definitions where we capture unit information. And then you can see we also have some range check information where we have two soft edit checks, meaning that we will allow the user to save the page. And we have an ID for that check. We have the formal expression using JavaScript saying that this item should be equal or less than this number. And then also an error message that is sort of printed again within the translated text here to say what is displayed if this edit check is triggered. I'll show another item to show one more thing. So here I'm displaying the vital signs performed item. So I know that's a yes/no question. So connected to the item def, we will have, first of all, a question, but we will also have a code list reference. So if I want to know more about the code list and the options that we have, then I move on to the code list section. Okay, and I'll move on. Next up is the code list section that I mentioned. So if I quickly review that, for this specific code list, we have two code list items. For the first one, the coded value is 1 and the label is yes, again using the translated text like this. I'll move on again. Next up is the condition definition, so condition defs, where we have all our visibility conditions. And here you can see the ID that is used or populated automatically is cond underscore item ID underscore form ID. So here you will again see either the simple expressions, what we call simple visibility conditions in Viedoc Designer. But this would also have the advanced visibility conditions, and then it will be using JavaScript again. But here we can see a simple condition saying that, well, this specific item here should be shown when this item equals 1. So here you have the condition defined. Now we're getting to the bottom of the page. We have method definitions where we have our functions and default values. And again, I know for this specific item we talked about, we have a default value adding yes as default. So you can see again, method definition MD underscore item ID underscore form ID. And then we have the actual expression that has been used here. With JavaScript, we just say return 1. So whenever you add something like this in Viedoc Designer, it's written to the ODM. At the end of the file, we will also have the roles defined, again with the vendor extension tag, where you can see for a specific role, you can see the ID for that role, the name for the role, and all the permissions that have been enabled for the specific role. And at the very end, you will find some design settings, and depending on your design, you can find different information here. If you are exporting a design that has validation warnings and errors, you will find the warning messages in this section. But okay, I will move back to the presentation quickly. Now that we have covered the ODM structure, I will talk a little bit more about design version compare and design version compare in Viedoc. I probably do not need to explain why this could be useful, but I'll cover this very quickly. Purpose with a comparison tool is to make designers more confident about the updates they are making to their designs. We know it can be difficult to track if you're making multiple updates, you are iterating, perhaps you have a very complex update or you have a long-running update that is taking weeks or months to complete. And with a compare tool, you can easily compare, well, what's the version I have on production today? What's the version I want to apply now? What's the actual changes in the end? It will also make it easier to work multiple people on the same design or taking over after a colleague or just delegating work to another colleague and then following up what changes were actually made. And it's also easier to share details then of the specific updates that were made. And some of you have probably been in a situation where a sponsor have asked you to make updates according to protocol amendment 4 or something vague like that. And we know that in a design that could mean changing one label in 2 minutes or updating 150 edit checks and making a lot of other modifications. So here you will also have much better tracking of what you had to do to update the design according to protocol amendment 4 and thereby showing the effort you had to spend on this. It can also be used to simplify the review for people reviewing the designs. Perhaps not to go through the compare output from start to finish, but to verify specific details and especially verify that no unintended changes were made. And this documentation of changes can, of course, easily be generated for audits, inspections, and other reviews. So for the design version compare in Viedoc, it will be introduced in Viedoc 484. A designer can now compare any 2 design versions within a study. The output will present the differences in the 2 ODM files rather than the individual changes performed by a designer. That means that one change by the designer could lead to multiple changes in the ODM, thereby flagging multiple changes. And of course, that's the sort of the reality that we have multiple changes in the ODM. The compare output may be perceived as a bit technical since we're relying on ODM terminology and references, but that's the intention to make it very clear and aligned with our exported ODM files and also contains references to how you can find more information in the ODM file. So let's take a quick look at what this looks like in Viedoc. And we will hope that the demo gods will be with me. Let's see if I can go. I'll log into a development instance and I will move to Viedoc Designer and a study that I prepared ahead of this meeting. I will actually start by deleting a design so you can see what I'm doing from scratch. So I have a study with 1 design version only. I have no possibilities to compare anything right now. But the first thing I'll do now is just to create a new design version. So I'll go from version 1, I'll duplicate the design to create version 2. And right away, I will go back to the overview page where you can now see that I have a possibility to compare a source design with a target design. So I'll do that and compare output will be triggered in a separate tab. For now, you can see that there is 1 change. And of course, the only thing that has been changed is the design version. While I'm continuing to making updates now, I will sort of revisit this tab and refresh it so that you can see how changes in Designer is reflected in the compare output. I realize that the real use case is probably not to use this sort of live, but to do it in the end once you're done with an update. But again, this is just for demonstration purposes. So I'll go into my newly created design and I will open a form and I will make a change to a label. So let's say that I want to shorten this label, just say drug instead, and I will save the form. Now I'll go back to the compare tool and I'll refresh the tab, and you'll see now that we have 3 changes. Still, the design version is changed. In the form definition section, we have an attribute on when this form was last modified, and this date and time is new. And in the item definition tab, for this specific item, we have for the question, translated text English, we have the old value and we have the new value. So really clear what has been changed, what's the old value, what's the new value, and a clear reference to the ODM, what part was actually changed. Let's make some other changes. We can take perhaps an edit check. I'll move to the CM end date here, and I'll modify the error message. I'll just be lazy now and I'll say new text. And I'll save the form. And again, I'll update the compare output, and you'll see that we have a new record here with a clear reference with an ID. This item, in the item def, we have an update. This range check with this specific ID, the error message, the translated text changed from the old value to the new value. I'll take another example and I'll move to the study workflow just to show you that this is covered as well. So I'll go to a schedule event. I'll change the name of the event to new screening. And I'll save changes. And just as you can expect, we now have more changes in the compare output. So we now have changes to the protocol section where the last saved date time is updated. But of course, the more relevant update here is in the study event definition, where the name now changed for this event from screening to new screening. And what is very nice here is that everything that you do within a design will be covered by the compare tool. So if I make changes to the settings and I change selection view settings and I make another setting here, let's call this, well, I'll just write again, new text here. You will see that this will follow the same pattern. I go back to the compare output and we now have a new change here within the global variables where this is kept for the card items, for the sex item, gender is the old value and the new value is the new text part. So let's go back to the presentation again for a few final slides. Just to summarize the compare tool, Viedoc, well, in Viedoc, you can now compare 2 design versions within a study. You cannot compare designs across studies. So if you would like to make some sort of comparison like that, you would have to export a design and import it to the other study. But any 2 designs within one study, the compare tool will capture all changes between 2 design versions. The comparison is fast and it can be performed on designs regardless of the status of the design, meaning that you do not need to publish it first or anything like that. So at any given time, you can run the comparison. And like I mentioned before, the compare output may be perceived as a bit technical, but it's aligned with the exported ODMs so that you can easily find the data that has been referenced. One thing to note here is that some old designs may have remains from old attributes that we were using in the past that we are no longer saving or storing in the ODM. And for that reason, if you compare an old design version with a new design version, you might see that some of these attributes are being removed. So in that way, it will be some noise when you compare new designs with old designs. Yes, and that is the end of my presentation, and I'll take a sip of water and I'll review what questions we have in the Q&A. And I see there are some questions on, well, revisions. And yes, I should perhaps have highlighted that. I started now with comparing design version 1 and 2, but we can also compare with revised versions. So you can compare version 2.5 with 2.4, or you can compare 2.4 with 1.11, or whatever comparison you want to make. So any design versions within that study can be compared. Okay, global design settings. There's a question if global design settings are included in the compare output, but it is not. So in the compare tool, we have everything that is contained within the design. And since the global design settings is outside that part, those are not covered in the compare tool. Yes, we have a question here on importing designs from other systems. That is possible. You can take an ODM file from another system and import it to Viedoc. You will probably have an incomplete design in many ways if you compare it to sort of Viedoc standards, because you would not have V4 extensions, and possibly you would not have the STM extensions either. And of course, the other system might have had their own extensions that Viedoc cannot read or interpret correctly. So it's possible to import designs from other systems, but how complete that design will be, that depends on what the other system is. And yes, I can see there are two questions here about what I mentioned towards the end with noise issues for comparing old designs. So perhaps I made you a bit concerned for no good reason. Let me very quickly show you instead an example of what I meant. So I'll go back to Viedoc Designer, and I know that we have some old rests, well, actually in the study settings in the alert section. So up until release 479, we used to store order numbers for the alerts that we saved in Viedoc Designer. That filled no purpose whatsoever, and it didn't mean anything. We didn't use the order at any point in Viedoc. So in the 479 release, this was removed to simply remove redundant information from the ODM. So we no longer store this information when we save alerts. But we also did not modify any designs that you had in your ongoing studies. So that was just a change we sort of slowly introduced. And that means that if you have older designs, you will most likely have alerts saved before 479 where order numbers were included. But if I resave an alert now, that order number will no longer be saved. So I'll just save an alert now without making any change. And you would probably expect that this would not lead to additional output here in the compare tool. But if I refresh the page here, you can see that the total changes now goes up to 11. And here you can see that some order numbers for these alerts have been removed. So they used to be 1, but now that's missing. So there are some old remains like that, but those are all documented in the Viedoc learning. So it should be easy for you to see and understand what's sort of legacy noise and what's real compare output, so to say. Okay, I see that we are running out of time. We will get back to you with a recording and answers to the questions that we did not have time to cover today. Thank you very much for listening in, and enjoy the rest of your day.